Good evening. Welcome to The Road Beyond. I'm Todd Duplantis. It's good to have you with us on the show. Good to be back on the air. We've got a great show lined up for you tonight. And our subject matter, very important. We'll be talking about that. We'll be discussing the history and current plight of Native Americans. But first, my co-host, Kat Franzmeyer, joining me from her home studio live. Kat, good to see you. You there? Let's see if we can get you to unmute your mic. There we go.
I'm sorry. Yeah. It's so good to be here tonight, and happy holidays to everybody. And so I'm looking forward to tonight's show so much, especially the subject matter that we're covering tonight. Native American women have been suffering, and we're going to hear more about that and why it's happening.
That's right, Kat. It's an important subject. You know, in fact, CBS News did a story today. It's published on their website, and they talk about Native Americans who are reported missing at a higher rate than the general U.S. public. The numbers are staggering, with at least 9,575 reported missing cases of Native Americans just in 2020 alone, according to the National Crime Information Center. What's going on here? We're going to shed some light on it with our guest in just a few moments. But first, Kat, let's get on with the news.
Yeah. Okay. So, Todd, this first story recounts the chilling details of what's happened 45 years ago live on an English TV station. We're all familiar with hackers nowadays, but on November 26, 1977, someone hacked into a live news broadcast on Southern TV News in front of a potential audience of 500,000 viewers. This became one of the largest hacks in British TV history. So take a look at the video of this hack. During a live news bulletin, the image on the screen became distorted, and viewers heard the voice of someone claiming to be brilliant, a representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command. The computer-generated voice warned viewers of the risk of world destruction. He then went on to talk about the rising of the hippie-like Age of Aquarius, claiming that all weapons of evil should be removed immediately. He also warned of complete nuclear destruction if his warning was not heeded. The weirdness continued on for a live broadcast for like more than 5 minutes. To this day, no one has claimed responsibility or has been charged with a crime for hacking into the live show. I don't know, Todd. What do you think? It was pretty difficult to hack into live shows nearly 50 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it was very difficult, but you remember, I don't know if you remember that famous case. It happened here in the States. I think it was on a cable channel back in the 80s, where someone hacked into a live newscast and used the Max Headroom mask. You know, I don't know if you remember, that was a very famous case back in the 80s. And that went on forever, too. I don't think they ever solved that case. So obviously hackers were able to get into the system somehow. I don't know, Kat. I don't know. What do you think? You think maybe it was a hoax?
What it reminds me of is Orson Welles' War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
People believed that literally the world was going to collapse from aliens descending on Earth. And it was the best hoax ever. And he was famous for it.
Well, I don't think he intended that to be a hoax, though. That was going to be a show. It became a hoax when everybody believed it. And they're like, what the hell's going on? The world's being invaded, you know? And that's kind of how that shook out.
Mass chaos. People fled into the streets of New York.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone thought the world was ending.
Yeah. So, all right, on to another story. Kat, this next story kind of ties into tonight's guest because it involves an entity that Native Americans would refer to as a skinwalker. Now, Lon Strichter's PhantomandMonsters.com ran a story recently about a crawling humanoid-like figure. That's terrifying enough. The story is told by a witness who says he owns a large tract of land in northern Oklahoma. He claims he was doing some target practice out there. Nothing could go wrong here.
Goodness.
Yeah, on his property, okay, with family members around.
Mm-hmm.
Strange things started to happen.
Well, I would think that would be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, okay, we're talking strange smells on the land, noises, all precluded the sighting, and the witness says he captured some images on his cell phone. You're looking at it right now. I don't know, not much to see here, folks, but Native American legend talks about so-called skinwalkers who can shapeshift accordingly.
Okay, so Todd, let me ask you this. So what do you see on the left and what is shape-shifting on the right?
I don't, quite honestly, if you look at this photo, I mean, you could barely make an image out, maybe where the arrow's pointed, but it's very fuzzy. So apparently they saw something on their land crawling towards them and something in the tree line. But I don't know. I couldn't see a lot in this image, but it certainly was an intriguing story of possible shapeshifters. And we know that Oklahoma is a site of Native American reservations. Now, tonight's guest is Kristen Shellenberg, and she is an anthropology professor at Houston Community College and a member of the Cherokee Nation.
Hey, welcome, Kristen. Now, as we look at these sad photographs to kind of turn the tide a little bit, we are reminded that this is a growing crisis for tribes across the Americas, from Canada to Mexico. So just take a look. All of these are missing, and all of these are missing, all these women, and the faces continue to flood in.
It's just, it really is alarming. And I kind of read some statistics, Kristen, just a moment ago, but this is an age-old problem, and it appears to be growing. I mean, we're talking 2020, more than 9,500 Native Americans were reported missing across this nation. Let's see if we can get you to unmute your mic. Okay. There we go.
Yes, it's a very concerning problem. Missing and murdered Indigenous women goes from Canada down through America, and it is an epidemic in Indian country all over.
Now, before we get to this part of the subject, let's look a bit about the history of Native Americans. And you and I have talked before, but I've been reading a book currently, and it's about the history of the Texas Rangers. It's called Cult of Glory. It was written by Doug J. Swanson. But the first several chapters of this book talk about when settlers first arrived here in Texas. They obviously didn't get along with Native Americans, and they spent a number of decades literally exterminating, in a way, Native Americans. And we're talking the Karankawas. We're talking the tribe you're associated with, the Cherokee Nation. You know, maybe you can talk about this, because this was something that not just happened here, unfortunately, in Texas, but this was across the United States.
Right. Across the United States, a famous quote that we have from General Sheridan is that the only good Indian is a dead one. And right. That was the consensus across America. So there were a lot of different efforts at genocide, from just massacres, the military just massacring villages. It was an honor to kill these savages. So then the last massacre was actually in 1890. It was the Wounded Knee Massacre.
Yes. Right.
There were a variety of different times where the government would pay people to bring in Indian scalps, anywhere from $50 to $100 per scalp for each red skin.
Right. And I was going to mention that too, because in the book, it talks about the fact that, a lot of the men who are mentioned in this book claimed prizes, and would actually take the scalps, whether the person was dead or not.
Right. It was pretty brutal. And then you also had the efforts at starvation, where all of the buffalo were killed in an effort to starve people. So these were systematic efforts at genocide. Then we start getting to more of the ethnocide, where the culture is pretty much destroyed. And Captain Richard Pratt, who founded the Carlisle Institute, which was a boarding school for children, he actually said, a great general has once said that the only good Indian is a dead one, and that high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres. In a sense, I agree with this sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. So that was the thinking after, as time went on. And so through boarding schools, which happened for about 150 years, that's about 7 generations. Right. Then foster homes and adoptions, sterilization from the 1930s to the 1970s. There was sterilization where women would go into clinics and go in for appendectomy and come out with a hysterectomy. Okay, so these are all part of the efforts at ethnocide. So this dehumanization of natives, the stereotypes, all perpetuate these injustices against Native people, which has led us to this problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Right. And before we get to, because I want to talk extensively about missing and murdered Indigenous women, because the numbers are shocking. Want to stay on the history a bit. When it talks about, particularly the literature I've read about settlers arriving here in Texas, it talks about several different tribes that were here. And I know you're involved with the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokees didn't originate from Texas, but they came through here on the Trail of Tears. Is that correct? How did that work?
On the Trail of Tears, some of the first Cherokee that did the Trail of Tears, they originally settled in Texas, and then they were told, no, you can't stay here. You've got to go up to Oklahoma. Right. But some of them did stay. And
there was also the Karankawas who were here in Texas. And there's, I guess there's a lot of misconceptions about the Karankawas. From what you know about them, what can you tell us? Because if you read certain literature, it tells you, they were a very destructive tribe. They really were after people, and they were practiced cannibalism. You hear everything. But what can you tell us about the Karankawas? Because they were in, especially Galveston area, for thousands of years. Am I correct?
Right. They were. And unfortunately, a lot of the history, the way it's been written, even though natives were trying to defend themselves, defend their land, defend their families, it's been presented in such a way that the Karankawas were, warring and going after people. But when you look at it in its context, they were defending themselves.
Yeah. Well, they were. And let's go to another tribe, which is kind of controversial. You probably have a different viewpoint, but I've read a lot about the Comanches. And from what I've read, they started, I believe, was it in Utah or somewhere up north, and actually then migrated towards Texas. And once they were here, from what I've read, they were a more violent nation. Is that correct?
Right. Some of the tribes were a bit more of warring tribes, and the Comanches were one of those.
Okay. All right. Kat, I wanted to bring you into discussion, because when you hear about something like this, and particularly the way, we've treated Native Americans here in this country, you would think that things are getting better, wouldn't you?
One would think, and I'm just really glad that we can have this open and talk and remind people that we're all Americans, and this is a horrible way to have this history, and to just be really mindful of that.
We've got to look at history, and we got to learn from it one way or another. And I guess getting down to the truth is where we're headed. And I want to move now into talking a bit about some of the missing cases. Kat, you want to bring up the one point about one of the missing cases you have in your notes?
Yeah. So, so Kristen, we know about Olivia Lone Bear back in 1985. Very, very sad story.
Actually, she went missing in 2017.
Okay.
Let me give you a little history about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Okay. So in 1978, the government limited the jurisdiction of tribes on Native land. And what that means is they said if a non-Native person commits a crime on Native land, on a reservation, then they cannot be prosecuted by the tribe. So a non-Native comes on, murders someone, the tribe cannot investigate, cannot prosecute. It is not their jurisdiction. You would think then it might go to something like the state, but you would be wrong. The land, although it's Native land, it's considered federal land, which means it goes to the FBI.
Right.
So by doing that, the FBI is limited in their resources, and they cover a lot of areas. So they cover areas like cybercrime, money laundering, organized crime, and terrorism. So if you have a place where Olivia Lone Bear lived, in North Dakota, you have 5 reservations. You have all these other FBI crimes, but you only have 3 agents to cover everything. So no one investigates, and no one, and that's why it's such an epidemic. There's no real investigation for these women.
Well, that's what you and I have talked about this before, and that's what really astounded me is the fact personally that, you have a large tract of land, a number of people, but really the whole state has a couple of agents who are investigating the whole state. So when you hear the numbers of 9,500 people that have gone missing just in 2020 alone, you might have maybe 24 investigators that are in charge of all of that?
Exactly.
Are things getting better as far as the government wanting to put more or allocating more resources to investigate the disappearance and really the treatment of Native American women? Because it personally, and I don't want to be blunt, but it sounds like open season right now to anyone on a reservation because there aren't enough people to investigate it.
Right. And in addition to this, the camps, the work camps that happen in these areas, because these areas a lot of times have resources. Work camps will come in. These men are transient men. They're not well vetted. They're in the area. Everyone knows if you commit a crime, you're not going to be prosecuted. So it really is a problem. But the government, under the Biden administration, I believe they have allocated funds now. Deb Haaland is one of our representatives, and she's Native. And I think that it's going to help a lot having her and Sharice Davids, their voices as Native women, to help hopefully get the government to do more. And I think they have, because from what I understand, there has been funds that are now being allocated to start looking into this.
Now, this is involved into a branded movement called MMIM, or Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women. And we're going to show you the very sad symbol. Maybe you can tell us about some of the origin with this symbol there, Kristen.
Okay, so the symbol is the red hand across the mouth. And with that, it largely is symbolic of the voices for the women that are not being heard, that are missing and murdered, and they don't have a voice. And then it's also symbolic of the silence of the media, the government, the police state departments, all of this. It's also about the silence that happens, because this is such a problem, but no one even really knows about it. It's not something that media covers, except I'm so grateful that, CBS has done something, but Native issues just are not covered, unfortunately, usually.
Well, I've heard about this story on Coast to Coast AM. That's when I first heard about this, and they've extensively covered it over the past 5 or 6 years. Every few months they'll have an expert on the show, and it's just amazing because last week you were on one of the shows that I do for Houston Community College. We talked about this subject. It was week before last, and then today CBS News comes out with a major article. Obviously, this is starting to get some attention. Is that encouraging to you?
It is encouraging because we need so much help with our resources. Yeah. There's not even a database that goes across the nation or anything where they can talk to each other and put women in so that we know everyone that's missing. It's we're looking forward to being able to actually get some assistance and do help find some of these women.
Well, another person that's covered this story, Kat, is a friend of ours, Amanda Thomas. She's a friend of our show, and she's been on the show many times. She covered this in one of her stories, too. Well, right, Kat?
Yes, Todd. And I just want to add to, I'm so glad that this is all being covered, because I believe this is a problem in every country in the world, right? Every country in the world has Indigenous people, and they're just being, shuttled under, not having their voices. And if we can be leaders in the world for we're making change, and we're not allowing these people to be go silent and murdered and missing, we're leaders. We should be leading.
Can I talk for a minute about Olivia Lonebear?
Yeah.
Okay, so Olivia Lone Bear. This is personal to me because I have a couple of granddaughters. I have several granddaughters, and they are part Lakota. Okay, so they're from the Dakotas, and they actually, one of my granddaughters knew Olivia Lone Bear. And Olivia Lone Bear was in her 20s. She had 5 beautiful children, and she went missing in October of 2017. Now, she wasn't found until July of 2018. When it happened, there were friends, family, volunteers. They were all searching, but no FBI help. Finally, when the lake thawed out, we still didn't have any FBI searching, so there were still independent people searching. An independent searcher using their own boat and their own sonar found what looked like a rectangular image in the lake. And so that's when finally authorities came out and recovered her body. And she was recovered from a truck. She was in the passenger side, buckled in. So that's a bit confusing because she obviously wasn't driving. Right. She was found 1 mile from her home. And now we are 4 years later and the case is still unsolved. And this is just one of thousands and thousands of women.
Almost 9,600 in 2020, of indigenous people that have been missing here in the United States. Another controversial thing before we get to Amanda Thomas's story, I want to throw out something out there because you and I have talked about this as well. I would imagine another controversial thing among Native Americans is the fact that you can turn on any news station, and when a young woman disappears of a certain race, they cause 24-hour news coverage until the case is solved. Mm-hmm. That's got to hit you pretty hard when the news stations are covering wall-to-wall news coverage, as they've done over the last year for certain girls. And I don't want to mention names, but that's got to certainly grab you and really upset you when you see something like that. But yet you have 9,500 cases and none of them have been covered.
And yeah, none of them are covered. It is very frustrating. It is heartbreaking. It is angering. And that's why I'm so grateful that you have invited me on to discuss this, because hopefully if more people know, more people will care and we can start making more progress in this.
Right. Kat, you want to tee up Amanda's story?
Yeah, of course. Yes, it was so good to hear from you, Kristen, and it is heartbreaking, and I'm so glad you're on the show. In order to highlight one of these many sad cases of the missing and murdered Indigenous women, we turn to our true crime expert, Murder Geek 7 on TikTok, Amanda Thomas, about the case of Selena Not Afraid.
Did you know that today is Murdered and Missing Indigenous Persons Day? In honor of that, today we're going to talk about Selena Not Afraid. Selena lived in Bighorn County, Montana on the Crow Reservation. She was a beautiful 16-year-old girl who loved to play volleyball and basketball. She loved horseback riding and beadwork. But Selena's past had a lot of tragedy. She had 5 different siblings and lost 3 of them in very tragic ways. Selena went to a New Year's Eve party in Billings, Montana on December 31st of 2019. There was underage drinking at this party, but she did stay the night at the house and the next day got a ride home with 5 other people. On their way from Billings to Hardin, where Selena lived, the car broke down. The owner of the car tried to fix it, but it was just a temporary fix, so he called his mom to come pick them up. It apparently only took his mother 10 minutes to get there. But when she did get there, they couldn't find Selena or her friend Arlana. After searching for a little bit, they did find Arlana. She was sitting in a ditch near the rest stop that they were at. She didn't have her shoes on and she was covered in scratches, and she had no recollection of how she got there. Selena wasn't with her. Selena's family called police right away. Witnesses said they saw Selena running into a field next to the rest stop that they were at. Tribal police, FBI, the Sheriff's Department, and the Bureau of Land Management all searched for Selena. It took them 20 days to find her, and she was only 3/4 of a mile away from the rest stop. Autopsies showed that Selena had died from hypothermia. Police said they found no evidence of foul play, and they concluded that Selena's death was an accident. There was alcohol in the van that made people think that maybe Selena was intoxicated or maybe she was even drugged. There is also a Snapchat video that Arlana posted showing two boys fighting in the back of the van. And I think it's worth noting that Arlana deleted all of her social medias after this, and the two boys moved out of state. I think there's too many strange coincidences in this case to rule it an accidental death. There are so many Indigenous women that go missing every single year, and they do not get enough media attention. What are your thoughts on this case? Let me know in the comments and follow for more true crime.
And Kristen, had you heard, obviously you've been familiar with Selena Not Afraid. Have you heard of this story as well?
No, there's so many that I hear about.
Yeah.
When you're on the social media, there's always flyers going out through different sources that are missing and murdered or missing women. I think it's important to note that it is women, missing and murdered Indigenous women. The murder rate is 10 times higher for Native women than it is for other women in America and in Canada as well.
And Kat, I know this is personal to you because, we live in Houston, sex trafficking capital right now. Unfortunately, we have that moniker. And, you have a younger child, and it does concern you when you hear this, especially with the murder rate. I mean, or missing rate, 10 times more likely that a Native American young woman or just a woman is going to disappear. I mean, that's got to be concerning.
It absolutely terrifies me, Todd, because my daughter's almost 18 and she's attractive, blonde. And we lived in Asia for several years, and I heard a lot about what was going on with sex trafficking there. And then coming back to Houston, understanding that Houston's the capital of sex trafficking in the world, not Asia, but Houston.
Right, in the world.
So I've done fundraising for Operation Underground Railroad. I'm very aware of it. I live in a very secure building where there are cameras.
Yeah.
And just women just disappearing. I was in my neighborhood, which is a very high neighborhood. I almost got thrown in a car and I could have ended up in, a foreign country very easily. So I'm very aware. And when I hear about women going missing, it's just a heartbreaking thing to me. And it's very close to my heart.
Kristen, we're running out of time. We got about a minute left, but if someone's interested in learning more about this movement, MMIM, is there a website they can visit to get more information? Or if they want to do something, write their congressperson, maybe make a donation, do you know where they could go?
There are definitely different organizations if you go online for missing and murdered Indigenous women, and they can give you a wealth of knowledge about this epidemic that's going on. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, though.
Kristen, we appreciate you being here. Kristen Shellenberg is an anthropology professor here at HCC, and we look forward to getting you on again because I know we have other subjects involving this that we can cover. Thank you for being here on the show tonight. Thank you so much for having me. Kat, it's a subject that we're going to keep covering here on this show because I know it's important to you, and we hope it's important to our viewers because we got to know where we are in this country and how we need to do things better. We're running out of time real quickly. Folks, follow us on TikTok and also find us on Facebook and Twitter as the Road Beyond Podcast. We have a Facebook group called the Road Beyond Podcast Fan Book Group. Kat?
Yeah, also follow us on TikTok at Road Beyond Podcast, on Instagram at Todd Duplantis65 for all the updates that you need. Also, make sure you, as Todd said, subscribe to the podcast.
Yeah, subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Yeah, and we can't wait to grow more and more and have more topics, and we'd love to hear comments and feedback so we can add more of what you'd like to hear about. All right. Thank you, Kat. Thank you all for being here. And we'll see you next week on the Road Beyond Podcast. Mm-hmm.